Good evening, veterans of the United States military and their families, our Canadian allies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Please rise for the presentation of the colors by the University of Michigan Army ROTC and the Veterans Honor Guard of Washtenaw County. And please remain standing for the singing of our national anthem.
Present colors. Ready, two. Right face. Both colors.
About face. Colors post. Post. About face. Right face. Forward march.
Please be seated. Good evening again, and welcome to the Michigan Theater on this very special evening. I'm Steve Schramm, Executive Director and General Manager of Michigan Radio. Tonight, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this second annual Service Above Self Honoring Our Veterans program. This will be a night of combat veterans telling their stories and musical performances in tribute to their sacrifices. Thanks to our veterans for their service to our country, and for all of you for making time to honor our veterans in this special way. We are honored to have many veterans in the audience tonight. So please rise and be acknowledged as I call out each branch of our military service. If you are able, please stand if you have served or are serving in the United States Army. If you are able, please stand if you have served or are serving in the United States Marine Corps. If you are able, please stand if you have served or are serving in the United States Navy. If you are able, please stand if you have served or are serving in the United States Air Force. And if you are able, please stand if you have served or are serving in the United States Coast Guard. Thank you all for your service and for your sacrifice for our country. Our event has been produced by Build It for the Brave, a nonprofit dedicated to raising funds to build a Fisher House for the VA Ann Arbor healthcare system. A Fisher House is similar to a Ronald McDonald House. It is a home away from home for the families and caregivers of veterans receiving or ongoing treatment over days or weeks at no cost to them. Michigan is a leading state for enlistment in the military, but we are also notable as one of the few such states that does not have a Fisher House. Ohio is building its fourth. Florida has 6, and Texas has 7 Fisher Houses. Donations received tonight and online will help rectify this notable shortcoming at what otherwise is one of the leading veterans health care facilities in the nation, the VA Ann Arbor healthcare system. Now, our first storytellers tonight, our veterans are Deborah and Kevin Trimble, who are both brother and sister. Deborah Trimble ended 8 years of service in the Air Force as a technical sergeant in the security force, becoming one of the first women to accept a full combat assignment. She is now enrolled at the University of Michigan Medical School on a Pat Tillman scholarship. Her brother, Kevin Trimble, served with the United States Army in Afghanistan. While on foot patrol, as you will see, he sacrificed so much to our nation's longest war. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce brother and sister, Deborah and Kevin Trimble.
Thank you. I was a cop in Baghdad in 2008. This was my first day. It's not so bad. Not sure what all that hype was about. Of course, it's absurdly hot, and I'm sweating in places I didn't even know had sweat glands. Fine moon dust is caked everywhere. In my ears, down my underwear, in my boots. It took me 45 minutes to clean my weapon. But my first 14-hour shift is finished, and nothing happened. No bullets flew, no IEDs exploded, and while on patrol, no one even rushed the gate. This is gonna be fine, I tell myself as I walk back to my hooch, stripping my gear. Not 5 minutes after I sit down on the cement step outside of my Connex, the giant voice sputters out, "Incoming!" Incoming! Incoming! If you've never heard a giant voice, they're pretty much gibberish, but they only announce things when shit hits the fan. It's replaced the old air raid siren. This time, it's a rocket attack. I see people running for bunkers. I don't even know where the bunkers are because this is my first day. But I do know where the armory is. And I'm a cop. Though only a lowly E3, the base's security is my responsibility. So I also start running, putting on my flak jacket, helmet, and gloves as I go. I'm listening for the whine just before impact. I remember doing this in training. I'm up, I'm running, I'm down. I'm up again, I'm running, I hear the whine, I'm down. The ground shakes on impact, but it's far enough away, probably the flight line. I dive down beside what I discovered to be one of the bunkers. People inside are terrified. I make my last blitz to the armory, where half of my day shift squad has already made it back and is arming up again. The rockets are hitting erratically, so we head out in a convoy with Black Hawk support from the ready pad on the other side of the base. I'm in the turret with a machine gun as we speed, or more like bounce, down the partially paved road to the infamous Sniper Alley, where we're pretty sure this is coming from. But we don't find anyone, or even evidence of anyone having been there. Not that night, or the next, or the next. Days go by. The rocket attacks continue. They're baiting us, and it is infuriating. Eventually, we do get them, though I was not lucky enough to be on that particular mission. Days pass. I get used to the heat, the sand, the constant imminent danger. I even start to enjoy it. The teamwork, the missions, the life and death, high stakes, black and white, life and death adrenaline high I get every couple of days. I have to remind myself, this is not real life. 4 years later, Private Kevin Trimble deploys to Afghanistan.
I will not die here. I will not die in this shithole. I repeated to myself after flying through the air and landing violently on the ground when the bomb detonated close to me. My reflexes kick in. I've trained for this many times. Shit, where's my rifle? Why can't I pick it up? I'm vaguely conscious that something is wrong because I couldn't sit up, and I have no idea why. I didn't know at the time that half my body was gone. Just gone in a fraction of a second. Nothing prepares you for that. I don't care how many briefings you go to or how much pre-deployment training you have. Nothing prepares you. There wasn't anything particularly interesting about the morning of September 18th, 2011. We were sent to sweep an area for improvised explosive devices like we'd done many times before. And as often happened in the really small villages in Afghanistan, our trucks couldn't fit between the houses. It was well above 100 degrees, and of course we have to get out of our trucks, dismounted, and walk through a village. We've been in that country long enough to know that it was extremely dangerous anytime you're walking anywhere. But we had metal detectors, and we checked every step that we could. Roughly half a mile from our trucks, our bomb detectors went hot. We found something, so we all spread out for a safety cordon and an observation perimeter while we waited for explosive ordnance disposal to show up. Private First Class Ryan James Cook and I went south across a little ditch to pull security and have an observation away into the desert. As we were standing there, waiting for EOD, we spotted a guy on a motorcycle speeding away. So Cook walked over to me to borrow my binoculars when my life changed forever. I was 11 feet away when the IED went off underneath of him. But at the time, I didn't know that my arm was gone, so I mechanically fished out a tourniquet and applied it as best I could, laying there waiting for whatever came next. Shortly after, very shortly after, but what felt like an infinity, my squad leader and the Navy medic in our unit applied the tourniquets to my legs as I was finally realizing they were gone completely. The morphine injection he gave me did nothing to touch the excruciating pain radiating throughout my body. I didn't actually know until much later that my good friend Cook had died and was killed by the blast immediately. One other member of our squad also sustained shrapnel to the face. The trek back to our trucks felt like an eternity. I don't remember how long we sat there because I was so focused on not going to sleep. But eventually, the pararescue team arrived, and thank God for Dilaudid. Back at Kandahar Air Force Base, I was stabilized after extensive surgery and prepped for the medevac flight to Germany. That was the first time it really hit me. I woke up, or maybe my head just cleared. I panicked and punched the flight medic who was there to keep me alive. As hard as I've ever hit anyone in my life. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I was going to escape. I don't really know where I was going to go. I was on a flight 30,000 feet in the air. But all I was worried about was escaping from there, away from that nightmare. I arrived at Brooke Army Medical Center at the beginning of October, almost 2 weeks after my incident. My entire family stayed with me there, alternating between napping in a chair in my ICU room and catching a couple hours sleep at the Fisher House, not a mile away. Later, myself and my family moved into the Fisher House for my extended care, and I still am indebted to the people there who assisted me, and later found out that the extensive medical care and treatment and rehabilitation that I received there affected more than just me, but also my family.
There were many individuals and organizations that stood by us and supported us in every way throughout that time. But the healthcare team, what they gave us was hope and life. They gave me my little brother back. If I could give that to one person, one family, my life would have meaning. It would be complete. So I decided to do it. Well, it's not quite that easy. I was 30 years old at the time, and that's just a little old to suddenly decide you want to become a doctor. But I'd been in college for one semester, so maybe I just didn't know any better. I had been to basic training, and I'd been to war twice. So I obviously knew something about grit and focus. How hard could it be? Michigan was my top choice and couldn't have been a better fit. This year, I began my training at Michigan's prestigious medical school. Thank you.
None of us have the words to properly acknowledge the Trimble's family sacrifice for our freedom and our security. We have to turn to Nobel Prize-winning author Ernest Hemingway, who wrote these words, and I paraphrase, "A man or a woman can be destroyed, but can never be defeated." Kevin Trimble. Thank you, America, for giving us a Kevin Trimble. He is now studying nanotechnology at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. And because of the care Kevin received for his terrible injuries by the VA healthcare system and the quality of care that his family received at the Fisher House attached to it, Deborah switched from law enforcement to pre-med, won the Pat Tillman Scholarship to the University of Michigan Medical School, where she is now. We are so proud of both of them. So Kevin and Deborah, once again, our appreciation, thanks. Please stay with us here on the stage right now as I introduce and welcome to the stage two special guests tonight to our Service Above Self, honoring our veterans program. It's my pleasure to welcome a proud supporter of our efforts to establish a Fisher House in Michigan, joining us for the second year in a row, the Honorable Debbie Dingell, our Congresswoman representing Michigan's 12th District.
Thank you.
Debbie and her guest will share some very exciting news just released today. Congressman Debbie Dingell.
Yeah, off to the side, I guess.
Good evening. Thank you, Steve, for that kind introduction. It's great to be here tonight to honor the brave men and women who've served our country and defended the freedoms we hold dear, and yes, the right for orderly transition of government that we are seeing today. It is my great honor and distinct pleasure to announce that Ann Arbor has been approved by the Veterans Healthcare System and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and the Fisher Foundation as the site of the first Fisher House in Michigan. Impacting the lives of 640,000 Michigan veterans and their families. Donations received tonight, online, and in the days and months to come will help move this project to completion, ending years of frustration for veterans arriving for critical care from all across our great state of Michigan, as well as from neighboring states, from Northern Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin, only to find Ann Arbor hotel rooms are sold out for a game or some other big event. But the reason that this is so important, and I think many don't realize that there are many sites that want this designation of Fisher House. And the Fisher Foundation knows what they're doing. And when we raise the money, then the VA takes over management and logistics and the running of the VA, and our job as a community then is to be there for community support. And I want to thank Ron Weiser as a special guest tonight. He was elected yesterday, so I'm glad to have our nonpartisan, bipartisan presence here to the University of Michigan Board of Regents. But he has offered to match any donation tonight that anyone gives. So Ron, thank you for being here and helping make this night so successful. Fisher House will provide a home away from home for veterans and their families so they can stay together throughout the treatment process and ease the road to recovery. Congratulations to the Build It for the Brave Committee, which has worked tirelessly to bring about this significant approval from the Fisher House Foundation. They actually made this a reality. Thank you for your hard work on behalf of our nation's veterans. And now, to explain the importance of this relationship with the Veterans Healthcare System in Ann Arbor, I want to introduce, she's had the job for a week. I want to welcome Mary Beth Scupion, PhD and Acting Director of the VA Ann Arbor healthcare system.
Thank you, Congressman Dingell, for your introduction and for being here this evening. It is my distinct honor to join you to make this first public announcement about the approval to raise funds and build a Fisher House, the first ever in the state of Michigan. We at VA are very appreciative and share in all of your dedication and your commitments to our veterans. You help us make our mission come alive, to honor Americans' heroes by providing exceptional health care. And with your help tonight and your support in the future, veterans like Kevin Trimble and Deborah Trimble, who came for an extended period of time for lodging, we will finally have a Fisher House next to our VA, offering free lodging for family members during their ongoing care that is needed at the VA. This brings us even closer to fulfilling Abraham Lincoln's promise to care for those who bore the battle and for his widow and his orphan. Thank you, veterans, for your service and your sacrifices. And thanks to each and every one of you here tonight for your unfailing support to our veterans. We look forward to this amazing partnership in this very exciting endeavor. Thank you all.
Thank you all, and we are very excited to share that announcement with you tonight, and we hope that you will be able to visit with us in the lobby following the program and perhaps make your donation to the Fisher House tonight. And Ron Weiser will also be able to make the generosity of that match this evening, so please take advantage of that opportunity. Thank you very much. Tonight's Service Above Self, honoring our veterans program, is sponsored by New Step Incorporated, Masco Corporation, Artis and Mike Chichella Sr., the Mandel and Madeline Berman Foundation, and Agnes and Stephen Redding. Other community sponsors include the Rotary Club of Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan Military and Veterans Services, the Michigan Theater, and Michigan Radio. Thanks to our signature supporters and sponsors for tonight's event. Now, 38 countries have allied to form the coalition that has battled terrorism in Iraq and Afghanistan. Our next speaker was one of these allies, a soldier in the Canadian Army, serving beside our own servicemen and women in Afghanistan. At the rear of his battle helmet was the flag of Canada, and every American who saw it knew instantly that he was a brother in arms. Please welcome a representative of one of our most important coalition allies, Mike Akpata.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, senior veterans, and friends. When I was asked to come, I was humbled. And I started to think, Mike, what are you going to talk about? What did you do? You didn't do anything that hundreds of thousands of other Canadians, Americans, Brits, and our allies haven't done. 38 years old, as a policeman, I was happy working at Windsor Police, and a reservist with the Essex and Kent Scottish Regiment. Let me give you a bit of a history about the regiment I belonged to. Formed in 1860, one of the first Commonwealth regiments, September 4th, 1939, to come to full strength. Why? Because the Yanks came over and donned kilts, sporn, and spat and joined the Essex Scottish. So the allegiance that we have is not only across the border, but it's in the family that I call my regiment. At 38 years old, with a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old, and my wife, a policeman who was on maternity leave, I decided to go to Afghanistan and was gone 6 weeks later. There was no lead-up time. When I got there, we worked with the Americans, we worked with the Dutch, and I'll tell you this. There's a very simple feeling when you look up in the sky and you see an Apache helicopter, and it has the roundels of the Royal British Air Force. When you come around a corner and suddenly there's a Humvee putting 50 cal down range and it's 10th Mountain. We had some very interesting occurrences in Afghanistan when I was there in 2007. Canada put tanks in the battlefield for the first time since Korea. We had troops under fire, and we were doing our duty as part of the coalition in ISAF against terror. There were some terrible days. There were some wonderful days. I got to meet the Prime Minister of Canada, and he gave me a hockey puck. I got to hold the Stanley Cup. I got to meet the Governor General. But I also have a story that reflects the story of most soldiers in any conflict ever. I got to meet some children. And one of the things that we did is I was a section commander. We were on convoy escort going out into Kandahar province and Panjwai district. And after a while, the section commanders were given a little bit of a break. We got gate guard. And the thing about war is that as adults who make war and politicians who decide to do war, they don't usually wear it. It is the children who bear the brunt of conflict at all levels. And one of the things that used to happen in Afghanistan when it hit 162, 163 degrees, the Aero chocolate bars that we had in our individual meal packs turned into a lumpy mess of hot chocolate. And we used to give it to these young gentlemen that used to come to the gate. We couldn't speak a word of Pashto or Dari, and they couldn't speak a word to us. But the one thing that I told my section is those children are innocents, and they will remember the flag you wear on your shoulder for the rest of their lives. One day, we were sitting there at the front gate, and a young boy came up, and he could tell by the hand signals that something was wrong. He made the this signal. And having been out and had some IED strikes, I knew exactly what that meant. We put on our kit, walked out to the loading bay where the Canadians would load up their weapons before we went outside the wire. And as we approached, we could see 3 prongs sticking out of the ground in the loading bay. We called the EOD, and they dug up 3 61mm mortars wired together. Had that young lad not come to that day, the gate that day, the Canadians going out that night wouldn't be here. He risked his life because during my tour, the Taliban put night letters on doors for teachers. The Taliban kidnapped and tortured people. And this young lad, who didn't know my name from Adam, stood and saved Canadian lives. How do you thank someone? Can't give them money. Can't give them an iPod. So what did we do? Well, my wife's father owns a meatpacking plant and makes the best damn pepperonis this side of Ann Arbor. So one of the things that soldiers know to do is trading. So I traded some pepperonis for some Oreo cookies, traded some Oreo cookies for some illicit liquor, traded the illicit liquor for all kinds of stuff, and eventually got something that I could give to these 2 boys to thank them for saving lives in my section. A bicycle made in Kandahar City. So when I was asked to come here, you need to know this. Uncommon valor is not an exclusively American trait. Self-sacrifice is not a Canadian trait. It is a veteran's trait. It is the trait of those who stand in the face of oppression for no other reason than to do the right thing. To say no when others will turn their back. To stand so others can experience the lives that we lead. Without our veterans, what would we have? What do we owe them? We owe them everything. What do I owe the members of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Land Infantry and 2 RCR that died on my tour? Here's what I owe them. I owe them to speak their names whenever I can. I owe to ensure that I will stand up and speak for the voiceless. I owe a debt that can never be repaid. I owe to make sure that whenever I'm asked to speak about veterans' issues, I will do it to remind the people who are here today that your citizenship does not grant you rights, it grants you responsibilities. You're privileged to live in the country you live in, and I'm privileged to live in the country I live in, and only because we live across the largest unsecured, peaceful border, could I zip across the border, stand here with you today, express my appreciation for the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and airwomen of the American military who worked with me in Afghanistan, and when I'm done, zip back across the border without fear or favor. Our 2 countries are joined together by a string, And every man and woman that's worn that uniform understands that that string is sacred, and it's important, and it's what makes us uniquely us. And if we lose that bit of humanity, we are no better at all. But right now, the friendship that we have between our two countries, I can tell you this, whether it was Dutch, whether it was German, whether it was British, a friend in that uniform is a friend of mine, and he who shall wear that uniform shall be my brother. And whether it's Second World War, Korea, Vietnam, Bosnia, peacekeeping, or any other places that we've sent our soldiers in harm's way to defend our right to disagree with each other, I will speak their name, for some of them have given their tomorrows for our todays. My regiment, the Essex and Kent Scottish, proud Canadian Highland Regiment, allied with 1st Ranger Battalion. 50 of your Rangers landed at Dieppe, August 19th, 1942. 553 members of my regiment landed, 51 answered the roll the next day. We've been bloodied, we've battled, we've sacrificed, we've hugged, we've cried, and we've learned, and we live together in peace. Let it stay that way. My name is Mike. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is Ann Arbor's Telerik Ensemble, one of the few self-conducted chamber orchestras in Michigan, founded just this year by violinist Rita Wang with 15 young professional musicians who share diverse backgrounds and deep friendships. One more applause for them, please. Our next speaker flew the Kiowa Warrior helicopter in Iraq. This single-engine, single-rotor military helicopter was used for scouting, observation, and direct fire support, and could be armed on either side with a combination of rockets, Hellfire missiles, or 50 caliber machine guns. The Kia Warrior was fast, agile, and perfect for nighttime warfare air support of our military in Iraq. But on this particular hot, dark night, with blowing sand everywhere, something started to go horribly wrong. It is my pleasure to introduce former mission commander and United States Army Captain Retired, Taryn Barnes.
Evening. Before I begin tonight, I'd like to ask all of you an important question, and you can respond by clapping if you agree. Is this a great night or what? Outstanding. Well, I tell you, in my life, I have been blessed to have many great days, as I hope all of you have. And tonight, I'd actually like to tell you about one of my best days when I was serving in the United States military. It was July 3rd, 2003 in Iraq, just a routine day after the fall of Baghdad. I was a young captain in an area reconnaissance unit, and my mission that night was to lead a 2-helicopter team into Fallujah in support of an infantry unit. It was a hot night. It's a sandy night, pretty typical in Iraq. It's about 9 p.m. We'd already met with the unit to discuss our plan, and we were just landed in a forward area refueling point to take on fuel and ammo before the mission. As the air mission commander, I sat in the left seat of our 2-seat helicopter. My job was to run the team. My longtime partner in pilot in command sat on the right seat, his job being to fly the aircraft. Kind of an important separation of duties when you're flying a 5,000-pound machine that defies the laws of physics to fly, and there are some out there that have the gall to shoot at you when you are trying to do this. Now, as we were beginning takeoff, we had a small area to work with because we were just on the outside of Fallujah. So the only thing separating us was a makeshift fence. It was nothing we hadn't done many times before. Because like I mentioned, if you know anything about Iraq, it's a wee bit hot and it's a wee bit sandy. Not a good mix for a single-engine helicopter when you're trying to get off the ground. As we began takeoff, we did what we called a run-and takeoff so that we can actually achieve lift. When my partner started this, I watched the altimeter as I always did. 8 foot, 12 foot, 8 foot. Quickly glanced at my partner to see why he was decreasing power, but he wasn't. And one look at his face said it all. At that point, I knew we were going to crash. Now, for any of you who have ever been in a crash, you know that those seconds feel like an eternity. And with the sand swirling all around us, for me, for my partner, that eternity was in complete darkness. Imagine for just a second, you're about to crash in a helicopter, you can't see anything, and you know in that moment that your fate is no longer in your hands. How would you feel? If you would indulge me, I'd like to ask all of you to close your eyes as I describe the crash, and please keep them closed until I ask you to open them. You feel the helicopter start to spin out of control, pitching wildly left, right, forwards, backwards. Although you can't see anything with all the sand swirling about, you can hear loud noises of the multiple warning alarms going off inside the cockpit. Suddenly, the helicopter spins 180 degrees and swings to the left. You feel a hard jolt as the helicopter hits something, and you roll to where you're virtually horizontal to your left shoulder. with the cyclic control stick beaten mercilessly between your legs, and the helicopter shaking hard. You feel the helicopter roll back to the right, where you're mostly vertical again, at least you think you are. And then, those vibrations turn from hard to extremely violent, to the point where you literally feel as though your teeth are coming out of your mouth. And for the first time, thought crosses your mind that you may actually die here. In that same instance, you realize that those vibrations are being caused by the blades hitting something. And instinctively, you crouch towards the middle of the cockpit because you know those blades are getting ready to sever from that aircraft, and they very possibly could be hurled at you and your partner inside the cockpit. As you crouch down, you feel your partner's arm, and you grab onto each other, waiting for whatever end is going to come. And then, the vibrations start to subside. The engine noises and the warning alarms become silent, and the helicopter becomes still. You slowly let go of your partner's arm, you sit up, and you see. Please open your eyes. This. This was the exact position my partner and I found ourselves in. The helicopter was mostly upright, thanks to a small berm that we hit, and miraculously, my partner and I were unharmed, save for a few bruises and 2 headaches from hell. When my partner and I looked around, we could see parts of the aircraft scattered all about. But as you can see, the body remained intact, protecting us. As if it was yesterday, I still remember reaching down to unattach my knee board, which is what we used to write notes on, taking it off my leg, putting it up in the dashboard, as I had done 100 times, and being surprised when it disappeared. In my days, I had not realized that windshield was no longer there. I heard voices yelling at us, asking if we were okay. And we yelled back for them to keep their distance because we didn't know if those rockets had been damaged and they had the potential to go off at any moment. About an hour later, a Black Hawk helicopter showed up to recover us. As I approached that Black Hawk helicopter, I looked in and I noticed that one of the pilots was my best friend. I stopped and made eye contact with her. She noticed that it was me. She told the other pilot to take the controls, and she motioned for me to come over to her side. I walked over to her side, she opened the door, and I simply just put my head in her lap. It was at that moment that the full weight of what had just happened sunk in for me. Now, 13 days later, as I stand before, or 13 years later, as I stand before you, and I'm stuck in traffic, or I'm having one of those bad days that we all have, I really do try to stop and remind myself just how blessed I am, because there are so many of my military brothers and sisters that would give anything to be having my day. So you ask, really? Best day ever? I tell you what, when you can walk away from this, you bet it is. Thank you.
Some wonderful and incredible stories this evening, and we're not done yet. And like Terrence said, any flight that you can walk away from is a good flight, and our next speaker can attest to that. He is Dr. John Alden Clark, Professor Emeritus of Mechanical Engineering here at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and a former department chair. But before, he became an expert on thermodynamics, heat transfer, fluid mechanics, thermal and nuclear power, space propulsion systems, and solar energy. First Lieutenant John A. Clark was at the controls of the B-17 Flying Fortress, returning from support of American soldiers at the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome a pilot who this year was awarded the French Legion of Honor Medal with the rank of Chevalier or Knight for for his participation in the liberation of France in World War II and was inducted into the Michigan Aviation Hall of Fame this past May. John A. Clark.
Thank you, Steve, and a good evening, everyone. My story begins in the morning of January the 5th, 1945. I was serving as a co-pilot on the B-17 Flying Fortress with the 100th Bomb Group of the United States 8th Air Force, flying out of England and over Germany. The 8th Air Force could mount 2,000 four-engined heavy bombers and 1,500 single-engine fighters in a single mission. It was the largest air force the Air Force ever had and probably ever will have. Our target that particular morning was the city of Frankfurt in Germany. Many of you have probably been to that city. But a month before this particular date, the German armies, assembled in force and in great surprise, had attacked a weakened part of the Allied line in eastern Belgium, known as the Ardennes part of Belgium, or even part of Flanders Fields, and had driven American forces back into central Belgium. Probably the target of the German army was the city of Antwerp, which was the only saltwater port allowing supplies to feed the American armies. The picture you see there, I might just say, I was in the black and white war. We didn't have colors in those days. General Grant had just taken the surrender at Appomattox not much long before that. In any event, that was taken. That picture you see was not on this mission, but a previous one. I'd been in the group since late summer, and that was a mission to Cologne. I happened to be in the middle of the picture. The other two are my colleagues, and above us and behind us is a B-17, a combat B-17. Well, this particular morning in January, it was our duty to attack targets deep inside of Germany. The 8th Air Force was basically a long-range artillery unit, you might say. We attacked industrial targets and strategic targets deep into Germany, all over Germany, and as far as Poland and Czechoslovakia. But today, as I said, we're to bomb Frankfurt. The idea was to hit centers of supply, transportation, communication centers behind the front that were supporting the German armies that were advancing quite rapidly into Belgium. In fact, on the map, you would see the line of attack of the German armies that would bulge into eastern Belgium, hence the name, the Battle of the Bulge. I can't go into too much detail, but I will just say that the morning of the mission, the flight crews are always briefed. The squadron engineering officer came up to me and with a big smile, and he said, "Hey, John, we got a new airplane for you." We usually flew the same airplane as long as we could, as long as it was flyable. And in the previous mission, the aircraft that we usually flew had been shot up and was being repaired. Getting a new airplane is not exactly like getting a new car. I won't go into all the details, but they all look alike, of course, and they have the same blueprints, and they're built pretty much the same, but they're all different. The differences are subtle, but pilots know that difference, and they sometimes have very small changes, but at crucial times, such as takeoff and landing. In our case, as you will see, it is the fuel consumption on the engine and other related activities. Well, we got to the target. We got pretty heavily battered by anti-aircraft fire, which is not unusual, but Frankfurt was a major city in Germany, and almost always we had heavy anti-aircraft fire. And we turned off the target and dropped about 1,000 feet to gain speed and turned back towards the west. About a half hour or so off the target, I noticed that the fuel pressure light on our fuel pressure gauge, the number 3 engine, began to blink. Not a good sign. Not long after that, that light went red. Now, you know, when lights go red, you pay attention, especially pilots. They get very, very attentive. The fuel pressure on number 3 engine, that's the engine on the right side of the airplane inboard, the fuel pressure dropped to 0. We immediately turned on our booster pumps, a pump at the base of the fuel tank, which adds additional pressure, confirming or helping flow of fuel to the engine, but it did no good. The manifold pressure dropped, and the engine sort of, and so we needed then to what we call feather the engine, shut off all the electrical part of the engine, and press buttons that cause the propellers to turn in line with the wind. In that way, they did not windmill. A windmilling engine is a sentence, it's a lethal sentence because it will ultimately cause an engine fire, and an engine fire in an aircraft is extremely unusual. Well, we looked at our fuel gauges, and all the fuel gauges show that number 3 engine had about 70 gallons. Numbers 1, 2, and 4 were roughly the same, but number 3 was out of gas. How do we explain that? Well, we didn't have flying gas stations in those days, so we simply began to plan for the worst. Our question was, how soon will the other engines run? Didn't take long to get an answer to that question, at least partially, because another 15 minutes, the same thing happened to number 2 engine. Light blinked, came on red, fuel pressure dropped to 0, and we feathered that engine. At that point, we knew we had a problem. So I called the lead ship in our squadron, talked to the airborne commander, and said, we've lost 2 engines, we can't keep up with the formation. Request permission to leave the formation and seek landing places in Europe. Of course, he immediately told us that we had his permission to leave the formation, and that's the last he heard of us. And it took us, when I finished the story, about a week to get back to our base in England, which is north of London, on the North Sea. And he apparently reported everything he knew about us, but after a week, they couldn't have any word from us, so they listed us as missing in action. If you read the official 8th Air Force report of that mission, you'll find that 1 aircraft from the 100th Bomb Group crashed in northern France, all crew killed. Well, I'm happy to tell you tonight that you can change the fatality total of the 8th Air Force or reduce it by 10 because we weren't killed, but they didn't know exactly where we were. Well, we got the crew together quickly on the intercom, and flight crews are quite democratic, that we don't have any stiff rules. We just sit and talk to each other. They know the line of discipline, all crew members do. And we told them that we have 2 options. You can parachute out now, and anyone who wants to parachute can go. It's perfectly all right. But if you do, you will probably become a prisoner of war. We were not far from the front between Allied forces and German-occupied territory. A front isn't exactly a line, it's a space, maybe 3 to 5 miles wide. And we said, if you stay with the aircraft, the other option is to find something fairly flat, or a landing field where we can, in fact, refuel, but at least a flat spot to put the aircraft down. Now, the B-17 is a very rugged aircraft, and that all the crews know it. The bottom of the aircraft is like a big sled. And the wings, in fact, stabilize the aircraft when it lands on farmers' fields, valleys, even water. You know the aircraft that landed in the Hudson River? that kind of splashed in on the bottom, and it worked out fine. So the crew accumulated or gathered together in the radio room of the aircraft, which is right in the center of the aircraft, quite well protected by the structures, and all sort of hugged together with cushions around them. And we began to then decide where to put it down, because they weren't sure, with 2 engines out, and for the reason they're out, what about the fuel in the other engines? How long would they last? And we had no idea. But we headed towards the city of Brussels. A couple of months before, we'd landed at Brussels to refuel, so we knew we could get some fuel there. But discussing the matter in the cockpit, we said, let's put it down on anything that looks flat. Well, you see how you draw a crowd. That happens to be an aircraft that crashed about 10 days after we did, but in a very similar way. It's from the 390th Bomb Group. That J on the tail means 390th. We often flew with them, and so it's not our aircraft. I can testify that when you crash an aircraft, you don't run out and take pictures. But in that case, they did, and I thought it would be a good example. Still, our black and white war. Well, it turned out that as we approached the city of Ghent, Belgium, we saw in the late afternoon dusk the light from the sky reflecting on a strip that looked exactly like a canal or a small river, but it was pretty straight, or it could be a landing field, and that's what it turned out to be. It was an advanced Spitfire fighter base occupied by Polish Spitfire pilots. I got a lot of stories to tell, but don't have time tonight. They're a tough bunch, I'll tell you that. And so we circled the field with our, wondering when engines are going to go out, and then came around and decided, well, let's just take it anyway. It was about 2,000 feet long. We required 6,000 in England. And the strips were just metal plates laid on, perforated plates, laid on whatever was reasonably flat. So we brought it around and came in what we call the final approach, just as the outboard engines coughed and quit. We had a 30-ton glider on our hands, and we were trying to glide. Pilots have a way of not necessarily explaining every move, but we knew instinctively we're going to have a little extra airspeed just in case the outboards do go out, which they did. And at the same time, we were at about level 3 on a 5-story apartment building, and it suddenly appeared up in front of us. We couldn't see it coming in because of the dusk, so we just pulled back, lifted the right wing, cleared the apartment building, and then straightened it out and brought it down and touched at about, I suppose, 120 knots, 110 knots in the middle of this strip. Applied full brakes. We tried to put down the flaps, by the way, but they were shot out over the target and didn't work. That would have slowed us up and given us a little bit better lift, but they were out. So we put on full brakes, but the wheels just locked and skidded along on the plates, the snow, melted snow and ice and water. And then at the end of the strips, we just kept right on going and into the Belgium swamp, trees, bushes, no poppies that I could see, and small trees flying up in front of us. And then the wheels cut long troughs about a mile long, and finally it must have hit something because the aircraft nose went up on its nose. The engines are all wrecked, and the front was wrecked, and then we just settled back. So that was it, but we have procedures for climbing out. And so we went through all those procedures. We had practice and training, and everyone got out without a scratch, and we felt extremely lucky. I climbed out the window and grabbed the guns from the top turret. You might see it there. Pulled myself up on top of the fuselage, walked along the fuselage, jumped down on the wing, and normally you jump from the wing to the ground, but by that time the ground and the wing were at the same place. So I just stepped off and said, "Greetings, happy to be here." So that was our experience, and it the problem with the new aircraft plagued us, of course, because we had not known. If we'd had the aircraft for at least one a small flight, we would have learned about those fuel gauges. And it may be that even in filling the aircraft with fuel that morning, the ground crew used those same gauges to fill it, so we were 70 gallons short on each engine. But we're here, happy to speak to you tonight, and thank you very much.
As the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us pledge allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we lift our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Please sing with me. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet
Catherine Larson, accompanied by Brian Altavoigt, You know, Catherine has an amazing voice. I first met her as a member of our Rotary Club of Ann Arbor, and she has a voice that's called a spinto soprano. Catherine was 27 years old before she sang her first solo, and the Ann Arbor Symphony is lucky to have her as their guest soloist, and so are we tonight. So once again, thank you to Catherine and Brian. Our next speaker was in college when 9/11 happened. Suddenly, his studies seemed very irrelevant. Matt Drake enlisted in the United States Army and qualified to become a psychological operations specialist. His very important military assignment was to take care of the needs of civilians in a country torn by war. How do you reassure and win the support of Iraqis? It begins by providing food and shelter. And so Matt was on a mission when the Humvee that carried him, a photographer, and an interpreter was deliberately rammed by a terrorist car carrying at least 200 pounds of explosive. It takes a minute to get to the podium now, but it has taken Matt Drake 12 long years to be able to get to this evening. Here is another soldier that war attempted to destroy but could not defeat, Matt Drake, and his mother Lisa, who played such an important role in Matt's recovery. Matt Drake.
October 15, 2004. I was 21 years old and had been in Iraq for 5 weeks. I was driving an armored vehicle. With me were two psychological operations teammates, a Marine videographer, and our Iraqi interpreter. A vehicle loaded with approximately 200 pounds of explosives drove at our vehicle and detonated, creating a 20-foot crater. My teammates were both killed, and my survival was uncertain. I was strapped upside down and surrounded by fire. The convoy stopped. My fellow soldiers somehow pulled me from the fire. I don't remember any of this. I had suffered second and third degree burns on my hands and legs, fractures to my right arm, collarbones, lower jaw, and damage to my neck. The injury that caused my entire life to change was my traumatic brain injury. I don't remember those first months. I was in a coma. I could blink my eyes, move my left hand, and my right thumb. That was it. I couldn't speak or communicate except through involuntary facial expressions. My mom read my face the best she could and would then be my advocate to the doctors and nurses. Of the 7 months away from home and by my side, my mom only got to spend 2 nights in a Fisher house in Germany. To her, that Fisher house felt like a hug from home. My body woke up one body part at a time. My mind woke up slowly and with a lot of work. After 3 months, I uttered my first words, no, no, no. After being asked if I wanted to repeat a tough therapy session. It became obvious that I was mentally like a small child. I was confused and frustrated and afraid if my mom wasn't there. I couldn't stand up or walk. Why were my arms and legs shaking so uncontrollably? The shaking is called ataxia. I still deal with it today. My short-term memories would last for only a few seconds. If you came to visit me before you were 10 steps out the door, I'd have no idea you'd ever been there. Sitting up with help and stacking cones on each other would leave me dripping with sweat and trembling with fatigue and pain. The physical and occupational and speech therapist pushed me, my mom encouraged me, my faith sustained me, and I worked harder than I'd ever worked before. After 3.5 months at Walter Reed, I was transferred to a polytrauma VA hospital in Tampa, Florida. The feeding tube in my stomach was finally removed. I had to eat pureed food because I had forgotten how to chew. My mom would feed me most of it and let me try to feed myself. My aim was bad and my arms shook, but I was always hungry, so I worked hard to get the spoon to my mouth, and it was messy. My brain couldn't figure out which way was up. Standing up on my own was impossible. I would trip over and fall down. Then I learned how to undo my belt on my wheelchair and try to stand. Of course, I wouldn't remember that I had fallen, so I'd undo whatever they used to tie me to the chair. I was like a determined 5-year-old about that time, and I thought the whole thing was rather funny. After 2.5 months in Tampa, I was transferred to the VA hospital in Ann Arbor. I spent the next couple of months undergoing therapies to improve my speech, balance, and coordination. Finally, I spent 3 months in a brain injury rehabilitation group home. After a year in facilities, I finally got to go home. I was about an 8-year-old mentally and in a wheelchair. I could not take care of myself in any way except I was feeding pretty well. I had my priorities straight. I received outpatient therapies, but that wasn't enough for my healing brain. I needed to be taught how to do things every day, the same things, the same way every day. Thankfully, after 1.5 years at home, we heard of a place in Omaha, Nebraska. They specialized in helping people like me learn to develop our skills to the fullest while also learning to accept our limitations. I ended up staying there for a year that changed my life for the better. I had been frustrated and humiliated by what I couldn't do, but they helped me focus on what I could do. Every task I needed was broken down into steps, which I repeated until they became routine. Did you know it takes 10 steps to brush your teeth? It took a while to learn them, but when I did, I was proud. I was able to throw away my cane and walk unassisted for the first time in 2.5 years. I learned how to spend alone in an apartment so that when I moved back to Ann Arbor, I was accepted into an apartment program here. I had become independent, far beyond what was predicted for me. I have lived in the same apartment for 8 years now, and I love it. Yes. I have staff who help me every day. They drive me to the places like church, Bible study, or the gym. I work a part-time job at a wonderful place called New Step. They make recumbent exercise machines that I use in every rehabilitation facility during my recovery. I still use one. My brain injury is something I've had to come to terms with. It is what I have, but not who I am. I am working hard to achieve a high level of independence. I will not quit. You will find my attitude is very common among veterans. Our military training taught us that quitting is not an option. We fight until we are victorious. We adapt and overcome. I will not let my brain injury stop me from doing what I want to do and what God wants me to do. Honoring my fellow veterans is one of those things. No veteran should ever feel forgotten or unappreciated. Each has paid a price for our freedom. We all come home from war with scars, inside and outside, or outside, some visible and some not. To all the veterans here today, I offer my gratitude. You went before me and stood in the gap to protect me, and I thank you. You are a force for good in this country, and I'm very proud to be one of you. Tonight, each one of you has chosen to be a part of something good. And for that, I offer my respect and gratitude. God bless the United States of America, and God bless you. Thank you.
They're not done with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is the Concordia Choir, conducted by Brian Altsevalt. This Ann Arbor musical treasure from Concordia University performs a wide variety of sacred choral literature, ranging from Renaissance motets to the masterworks of the 20th century. This is the second year that the choir has joined us for our program event. We appreciate their participation and their beautiful sound. One more time, let us welcome them with our applause. Our last storyteller tonight is a graduate of the United States Naval Academy, a former jet fighter pilot, and a combat veteran with 74 successful missions over Vietnam. In addition, he helped start the Top Gun School in Miramar, California. Captain Charlie Plum was shot down over enemy territory on his 75th combat mission just 5 days before he was scheduled to return home. He ejected from his F-4 Phantom jet, parachuted into enemy hands, was taken prisoner, tortured, and survived nearly 6 years in communist prison camps. Tonight, Captain Plum tells his story of winning through adversity, which he has shared with more than 5,000 audiences in this country and around the world. To get a better feel of what this man has been through, let's watch this video first.
Tower X-ray flight at 3, we're 15 to the northeast for landing. Now 1 Charlie 7 November, go. Roger, auto, 20 knots close. Rifle, max in the park, elevation 30. 7 November, golf, roger, check your front left side, I'll check my taxi sign, 7 November, golf out.
The prison cell I was in Vietnam was 8 feet long and 8 feet wide. I remember distinctly the dimensions of that little cell. I could pace 3 steps in one direction before I ran into a wall. Then I had the opportunity of turning around and pacing 3 steps the other way. And I thought a lot of times, what's a Kansas farm kid like you doing in a place like this? Inside my new little home, I had nothing to do. Not a book to read or window to look out or TV, telephone, BlackBerry, Bluetooth. I didn't have a pencil or a piece of paper. For 2,103 days. To give you a better feel for that window of time, 2,103 days equates to age 24 to age 30 in my life. Turn your calendar ahead to the year 2022. Consider between today and 2022. The books you read, TV you watch, deals you do, kids you raise, it's a pretty good chunk out of a guy's life. Now, I'd been a very active guy, like each of you. On the go all the time, searching for an extra 15 minutes a week to call my mom. And suddenly I had 24 hours a day for the next nearly 6 years. I'm describing this scenario to you somewhat semi-dramatically. Please excuse the drama. In no way do I intend to invite sympathy from this crowd. But I think the most value I can be this evening in your life, professionally and personally, is to invite you into my little prison cell. You see, there's a great deal to be learned here. And I'm convinced that adversity is a horrible thing to waste. The first thing you learn in a prison cell is pain. This hurts. This hurts a lot. Second thing, you might not suspect this. Second thing you learn in a prison cell is, well, the days eventually wear into weeks and weeks and months into years, and you acclimate. You learn how to breathe deep and think about things far away, sunny beaches and warm breezes and thoughts of home, and you know what happens? You get used to this. In fact, you get so comfortable in your little prison cell that the last place you want to go is outside the cell because it's dark and lonely out here. At least you know the devil in the light. And what happens is you get a restriction built up, and it's not the 8 feet between the walls. It's the 8 inches between your ears. You're in a mental box. And this is a mental game. I'm convinced the mental boxes of our lives can be more restrictive than those walls of stone and steel that I was behind. But it didn't take me very many miles. 3 steps by 3 steps, I was going nuts. I finally decided, Charlie, if you're going to survive this, you're going to have to keep your mind active. Come up with something to do. Make a little game to play. I thought, that's what I'll do. I'll make a little deck of cards. And I did. I constructed a little deck of playing cards, about the size of postage stamps. I tore these cards from 52 little strips of toilet paper. And I can tell you this with authority, toilet paper is tough to shuffle. You don't lick your fingers very much when you're shuffling that toilet paper. What a treat it is to be with you, and what an honor it is to share this stage with my heroes. My goodness, the stories we've heard this evening. How do you put it all together? And then the fact that we've all gathered here to support a great cause, the Fisher House. When I came home, I was in a hospital at Great Lakes near Chicago. My parents came to see me there, and my 2 brothers and my sister were all there. And they stayed in a cheap motel because that's what they could afford. I am so pleased to see Ann Arbor supporting this effort to make this Fisher House a reality. We did the same thing in Los Angeles, and I was involved in fundraising for the Fisher House of West LA VA, right there in the Los Angeles area. And it has now treated hundreds and hundreds of families supporting vets. Well, if you're a veteran, you've served, and I thank you for your service, but there's more to do. If you're a non-veteran, And here tonight, I've got a suggestion for you. The way you can serve your country is by serving those who have served. And there's no better way to do that than make a place for their families to visit them while they're undergoing treatment at these VA centers. And it works. It really works. But I think we're here also to pack some parachutes. Let me explain that. I sat down in a restaurant in Kansas City not so long ago. About 2 tables over, a guy kept looking at me. I didn't recognize this gent. He stood up. This guy walked over to my table. He pointed at me and he said, "You're Captain Plum." I looked up and I said, "Yes, sir, I'm Captain Plum." "You're that guy. You flew jet fighters in Vietnam. You're a fighter pilot. Part of that Top Gun outfit. You were shot down off the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. You parachuted into enemy hands. You spent 6 years as a prisoner of war." Somewhat dumbfounded, I looked up at this guy and I said, "How in the world did you know all that?" He finally broke into a smile and he said, "Because I packed your parachute." Tell you this, for this guy that runs around the country making speeches, suddenly I was speechless. The best I could do was stagger to my feet, reach out a very grateful hand of thanks. He came up with just the proper words. The guy grabbed my hand, he pumped my arm, and he said, "I guess it worked." I said, "Indeed it did, my friend. And I must tell you, I've said a lot of prayers of thanks for your nimble fingers, but I had no idea I'd ever had the opportunity of expressing my gratitude in person." He said, "Were all the panels there?" I said, "I appreciate your concern, and I must be honest with you, they weren't. Of the 18 panels I was supposed to have in that parachute, I had only 15 good ones. 3 of the panels were torn. But it wasn't your fault, it was mine. I ejected from that F-4 Phantom jet at 600 knots, close to the ground. I was well outside the envelope of that parachute. You did your job, I didn't do mine." I said, "But let me ask you a question. Do you keep track of all the parachutes you pack? Do you know of all the lives you've saved?" The guy said, "No." Now, this is the most important part of the conversation that night, and it may be the most important thing I say to you this evening, and I think it deals directly with service above self, the Rotary motto. I think it deals directly with the Rotary 4-way test. I think it deals directly with building a Fisher House in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Here's what he said. He said, "No, I don't keep track of the parachutes I pack. It's enough gratification for me just to know that I've served." You have an opportunity tonight to put some money in that envelope that you got with the program, or sign online, or ask your boss or your company to support this effort. And you may never know. You may never know who you have served, whom you have served. You may never know the families of the veterans that would like to thank you for your gift and for building this wonderful Fisher House. And then the guy and I shared a conversation that night, and he said, "You know, I'm not the only one who packed your parachute." He said, your physical parachute, of course, I packed that one, but your mental parachute, your professors and instructors and your mom and your dad, your emotional parachute, your spiritual parachute, all those had to be in place when you were bailing out over enemy territory. And it was true. I got my parachute packed early in life. I grew up in Lecompton, Kansas, town of some 325 souls, and a couple of Presbyterians. I was a rich kid. Filthy rich we were. I didn't have any material wealth, didn't have any indoor plumbing until I was 9 years old, but we were rich. Rich in family unity and love, and had a great childhood, but I grew up in a 3-room house, 3 rooms. Not 3 bedrooms, 3 rooms total. In fact, I shared the only bedroom with my big sister and my 2 little brothers. In fact, I never slept alone until I got married. Some of you aren't laughing at that. I was a Boy Scout, through the newspaper, got my parachute packed. Mom, dad, preachers, teachers, a coach that told me that it wasn't what was around me, It was going to be the choices I made about those things around me. And regardless of the adversity that I faced, I still had the choice. I could choose my attitude, happiness or sadness. I could choose profit or loss, health or sickness, life or death, or I could choose to give away all those other choices. And at the Naval Academy, I had great leaders there, and I learned a lot. But I got my parachute packed. Now, don't miss this metaphor, okay? People gave of themselves, asking nothing in return, okay? That I might have some of those nuggets when the going got tough. And they were professors and officers and other midshipmen and the superintendent who would stand in front of the big pep rallies before the football games. And this guy would clench his fist. You could see the veins running his brow. He would say, "You guys can do anything you set your minds to do." And we did. Took a ragtag football team and produced 2 Heisman Trophy winners in 4 years. We were number 2 and number 1 college team in the nation for a while. Best of all, Navy beat Army 4 times straight. Sorry, Art Holst, I just had to say that. He was right. We could, in fact, do anything we set our minds to do. Graduated from the Naval Academy, married my high school sweetheart, lovely blonde girl from Kansas under the Arch of Swords. Flight training, launched on the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk, a floating city. You saw the video, exciting times. 74 successful combat missions. Imagine me, 24 years old, in command of a multi-gazillion-dollar airplane. See this hand? I have 2 throttles in this hand. I shove these throttles into the afterburners. I can go 1,400 miles an hour, and that's a long way from a John Deere. You see this finger? Pull the trigger on my control stick, release the missiles from underneath my wings, and I can knock down enemy airplanes that I can't even see. I really am the Top Gun. I'm the best of the best. I'm the guy that always stands tall. I'm the one that's never afraid. Hey, I'm probably bulletproof. How about it? You ever feel bulletproof? You had several veterans on this stage tonight that felt bulletproof, as I did. You can't go into combat thinking you're going to get shot down or you're going to get your legs blown off. That's not the issue. You go to serve, whatever the cost. We were hit by a surface-to-air missile. My co-pilot in my back seat, it exploded as some 12,000 pounds of jet fuel sent that airplane topsy-turvy, end over end, down towards that rice paddy below. I ejected. My co-pilot ejected. Our parachutes opened, and we came floating down over enemy territory. Ever been in one of those parachutes? I don't mean the nylon ones. I'm talking about those parachutes of life. The little fender benders we get ourselves into. Talking about something as insignificant as being cut out of your lane on the highway, something as major as the loss of a child. How do you handle that? What do you do? How do you pull from within when you meet the big challenges of life? Not easily done. And I'll tell you this, we have some returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan that are in those parachutes right now. They're learning a new way of life, and their families are trying to support them the best they can. And it's not easy, hanging in parachutes. What do you do? All I can tell you is what I did. I felt the opening shock of the parachute. As I had been trained as a fighter pilot, I immediately looked up and I counted the panels in my parachute. That technique is called assessing your support group. I looked down to the unknown. They're shooting at me. The audacity of this, don't they know I'm the top guy? Look, they just knocked down my multi-gazillion-dollar jet fighter, and now they're shooting at the pilot. And I'll tell you this, when you're dodging bullets, it's tough to come up with a long-range plan. So what do? I don't know. All I can tell you is what I did. I took a deep breath, like that old gunny sergeant taught me at the rifle range, and I let about half of it out, tried to calm myself. And I bowed my head, and I said a prayer. I asked for a little extra strength that day from above. I'll never forget that prayer. I thought about that prayer a lot over the next nearly 6 years in that communist prison camp. I thought back to that moment in time, and I'm dangling from that parachute, and I'd say to myself, well, dummy, Why didn't you make a deal with God? Promise to be a righteous, sober, godly guy the rest of my life. Lord, all I need from you is a little wind. 10, 12 knots, gusting to 40, but please. I guess I didn't feel in much of a negotiable position, so I just prayed for the guts it was going to take to survive. And I prayed for my wife. This was my war, not hers. And yet, at the end of the Vietnam War, my wife would have felt more pain than I did. I hit the ground, sunk about waist deep in a rice paddy, descended upon by a bunch of the enemy, stripped me of everything I had, tossed me in a prison cell and tortured me for 2 days. And that's when they put me in this little 8-foot by 8-foot room. The one I described to you from the very beginning. Wasn't kidding you an inch. About 200 miles into my experience, I heard in the far corner the chirping noise of a cricket. Paid no attention at first, but the longer I listened, the more rhythmic it sounded, and so I walked over to the corner, found there no cricket, but a little piece of wire about that long. It was poked through a hole at the base of the cell wall and scratching on my concrete floor, making this chirping noise like a cricket. I reached down and tugged on the wire, and it tugged back, and I tugged again, and it disappeared. But it came back about an hour later. This time the wire had a note wrapped around the end of it. This note was written on a dirty piece of toilet paper. Just blobs, and I could barely make it out, but it said, memorize this code, then eat this note. I did it. I memorized the code. I ate the note. Sneaked back to the hole in the wall and started tugging on that wire, communicating with the first prisoner that I would communicate with. On the other end of the wire, Lieutenant Commander Bob Shoemaker, fighter pilot extraordinaire, astronaut candidate, better than that. Here's a parachute packer. Funny how those parachute packers sort of slide out of the shadows of your life when you need them the most. And he'd been in that prison for 2 years when I was shot down. He was there for a total of 8 years. 2 years piecing together little bits of wire, stuffing them out a hole in his cell wall, across a storeroom between our 2 prison cells, over the boxes and around the shovels and through the ropes and into the little hole in my cell 14 feet away. Just to contact another American. Just to pack my parachute. His first words, how you doing, buddy? My first words, I'm doing terrible. Buddy? My president sent me over here. It's his dirty political Vietnam War, not mine. Enemy's not playing fair. They're torturing prisoners. It was not my airplane I flew. That was a U.S. government airplane. Congress bought it. I didn't. They should be here. I should not. This whole thing is not fair, what's going on in my life, but it's not my fault. I'm the victim of circumstances beyond my control. Shoemaker said, you want to know your biggest problem? I said, you mean I have problems bigger than the ones I can see? Sounds like you're suffering from a fairly common prison disease, he said. A lot of guys get it. Some guys die from it. Oh, man, what's the name of this disease? He said, well, around here we just call it prison thinking. I said, prison thinking? He said, Roger, you think you're a prisoner. Well, duh. Look at this. I am bleeding from 4 open wounds. I have no medical care, okay? 4 holes in my body where blood's coming out. I have boils all over my face. I can barely see through these boils all over the rest of my body. I'm down to 115 pounds. My sole possession in life is a rag I have knotted around my waist to hide my nudity. Clearly, I'm rotting away in a communist prison camp, and now, to add insult to injury, they put me next to a positive thinker. I kept tugging. Okay, tell me about this prison thinking. He said, don't you see? When a fighter pilot is first blown out of the sky, or when any of us go through a little wrinkle in the plan of life, what's the first emotion? Oh God, why me? This is so terrible. This event will never have any value. In fact, the best this time can ever be is a period of time I can forget someday. But it's not my fault. I didn't start this war. I don't control the enemy. I didn't build that airplane. I'm the victim here. Oh, he says, there's your problem. I said, what's that? He said, when you blame everybody else for the challenges of your life, you give away control of your life. He said, there's good news in this prison camp. He said, we have the finest team I've ever been on. We have the greatest leadership I have ever seen. Our leaders can't talk to us. They can't see us. They can't discipline us. They can't hire us. They can't fire us. But the leadership in this prison camp has given us new life by giving us a new definition of our mission. We are not on the defensive. We are combatants. We are warriors, and we will continue to fight until our last breath. Whew. Pretty heavy stuff. But it turned the whole issue around. It was amazing how the leadership in that prison camp made us all better and not bitter. And we survived. What a parachute packer he was, and the leadership there as well. And my old flight instructor, John McCain, was right in there with him, man. He was there with us all the way. But the best leader in the place turned out to be a Navy sailor, an enlisted guy. How did a Navy sailor get into a prison camp in an air war over North Vietnam? Well, he fell off his ship. He used to tell us, I wasn't captured, I was rescued. And he was. 19 years old, Seaman Douglas Hegdell from Clark, South Dakota, in the middle of the night, falls off the fan tail of the cruiser Canberra. Could he take a joke? We'd tug on our wires in our secret code. We'd pass around a little questionnaire, just for something to do. Who's the oldest in the prison camp? Who's got the most kids back home? Who's been here the longest? One time we had what we call the high-fast, low-slow contest to try to determine what fighter pilot had jumped out of his jet going highest and fastest, who jumped out going lowest and slowest. Well, high-fast contest was won by some Air Force jock who punched out of his F-105 at 52,000 feet, 1,000 miles an hour. And the low-slow contest was won by the Navy sailor. 12 feet at 15 knots. Oh, but here's the interesting part of his story and why I take your valuable time to tell it. This insignificant, entry-level, lowly, minimum wage, new hire, part-timer, you know what I'm talking about, right? The guy didn't seem to suffer from this 8-inch box. He didn't suffer from the prison thinking that the more mature of us college graduate officer class fighter pilots of the world did. He didn't seem to blame anybody else for his problem or feel sorry for himself and take on the victim mentality. What did the sailor do? He set to work. He got into action. He made something happen. He started tugging on wires and collecting all the names of the prisoners. He memorized our names, 254 men in that camp. He put our names into songs. Then he went back through his list. He memorized our social security number or identifier, 200 different long, unbelievable. Still wasn't finished. Went back through the list, memorized our next of kin, wives and fathers. Went back through the list, memorized their hometowns all the country. And finally, I'm not kidding you, the sailor memorized the telephone numbers of each of the relatives of each of the prisoners. That took 2 years. About that time, the enemy is wanting to show their lenient and humane treatment. They're going to send somebody home early. First guy they went to was John McCain. He refused. They're still looking for someone. Our senior man sent the message to the sailor, son, I want you to volunteer to go home first. The sailor sent back, sir, with all due respect, I would rather stay here with the team. Our senior man, Jim Peary, sent back, that's not an option, there's a direct order, shove off. The sailor said, aye, sir, home he came. Now write the script on the sailor. What would you expect of this guy now? 2 years in prison by accident. Starved, humiliated, lonely, tortured, but things are looking up. He has 2 years back pay in his pocket, and he's free on the streets of San Diego. Oh, did I tell you he was a parachute packer? What do you suppose he did? Sure, he started to travel, spent his own time, his own money, west coast to east, north to south. He went through each one of those hometowns he'd memorized. He dialed each one of those telephone numbers he'd memorized. He spoke to each one of the wives he'd memorized, told her that her prisoner was alive. Let me ask you this question. You know those folks I'm talking about, those parachute packers? Hint, this auditorium is full of them. you would not be here if you weren't concerned about someone else. You would not be here if you were looking for a trade rather than a gift. Oh, there's not in this, just in this room, but of course, there are parts of our families. I thought about my wife a lot, the lady I had married under the Arch of Swords after the Naval Academy Chapel. I thought about her a lot. I would fast forward my mind an hour a day. I had planned the next 20 years around her. Had 20 years of Christmas trees, every ornament on the tree. 20 years of her birthdays. I had 20 years of meals. I'd figured out 3 meals a day for 20 years. What a menu. I had cheeseburgers and chocolate malts. I had no rice. The day finally came. The war ended. We traded prisoners, 10,000 of them for 591 of us. We came home on a big old Air Force C-141 cargo jet. Stepped off the plane at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, ran to the first telephone I could find to call my wife, and she had gone. Called my parents back in Kansas. What's happened to my wife? He said, well, she hung on for 5 years, then just 3 months ago, your wife filed for divorce. She's engaged to another guy. Here comes another challenge in my life. And I'm thinking, I didn't learn much over there in those prison cells. But if I learned one thing, it's that it's not what happens to you, it's your response to what happens to you. And if I can, pick up my bootstraps and press on with life and be better because of the experience I have faced. And I'm not the only one that's done this. 591 came home, they thought we'd be in baskets. They thought we'd be vegetables. They had our families briefed to institutionalize us for the rest of our lives. So far, from 591 men, we have produced 17 generals, 7 admirals. Most of us retired as senior grade military officers. We have doctors and lawyers and preachers and teachers, a vice presidential candidate, a presidential candidate from our number. We have 2 ambassadors, a governor, several mayors. They're telling us today we're healthier mentally and physically than if we hadn't been shot down. How's that for my first pronouncing that adversity is a horrible thing to waste? Shoemaker on the end of the wire, 2-star admiral today. Shue flies an experimental airplane that he built in Pennsylvania. I fly an experimental airplane from California. We meet at Oshkosh, Wisconsin every year for the big air show there. And I thank him again for packing my parachute. Guy in my back seat, my co-pilot, came back to the States, going back to flying Navy jets off aircraft carriers. Some guys never learn. The kid that memorized the names, the sailor fell off his ship. He's a teacher, still packing those parachutes. My ex-wife married the guy she was engaged to. They're living happily ever after. I remarried a wonderful lady, and we have 4 kids, all grown now, and 2.5 grandchildren. And so things are looking good. I ran a marathon a few years ago in Alaska. It's called the Midnight Sun Run. It's the Saturday closest to the longest day of the year. I chose that marathon because I figure I might need 24 hours of daylight to run 26 miles. Took 2 of my kids there. Joe, Evie went with me. We're at Anchorage, at the hotel the night before the race. Kids, this is your dad's craziness, and I don't want to impose on your vacation. So in the morning, it's an early go. I don't even know where this race is. You guys sleep in, take it easy. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. It was a warm day for Anchorage, 83 degrees, and I'm chugging along about halfway through this course. About mile 13, I hit the wall. I'm just sweating like crazy, just barely putting one foot in front of the other. I'm thinking to myself, the most beautiful sight in the world is going to be that finish sign. But it wasn't. It was under the finish sign. Here's Joe, Evie, 2 of my kids, cheering on the old man. When I finally caught my breath, I went to my kids and I said, you just don't know how much it means to your father to have you here. But how did you find the finish line? Well, Dad, we shared a cab with a couple of guys from the hotel. They knew where it was. I said, and how did they know where it was? Well, Dad, they ran the race. They came back to the hotel. They had breakfast. What's the message here? As your final storyteller, what's the message to you from the other veterans that you've heard of And you've heard from the Trembles and Canadian Mike and John, and wow, what stories they have had. I can't even compare, I can't even imagine what they have been through. But what does it mean to us? You'll never be prisoners of war. Hope and pray that none of you will ever be injured in combat. But how can we serve? We can serve those who have served and continue to do that with a donation for the Fisher House and our support for the veterans in this VA center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And if we can do that, if we can tug on some wires and take some risks and pack some parachutes, I'm convinced we can do anything we set our minds to do. Great being with you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You're very kind. Thank you.
Days gone the sun from the
Ladies and gentlemen, the Concordia University Choir, conducted by Brian Altavot, a wonderful sound and a beautiful way to end our night. And on behalf of us, all of us gathered here tonight, I have the privilege to say thank you to all of our veterans that were here tonight for your service, for your sacrifice, and especially to our storytellers. Let's welcome them all back onto the stage right now for one final round of your applause and appreciation for their service above self, their bravery, and their patriotism. Deborah and Kevin Trimble, Taryn Barnes, Matt Drake, John A. Clark, Canadian ally Mike Atpata, and Charlie Plum. Thanks to these wonderful veteran storytellers giving so much sacrifice of themselves and a dramatic story to all of us for tonight. So we want to thank all of you for being here at the Michigan Theater, for supporting our veterans in person here this evening. If you'd like to donate to our ongoing drive to build that Fisher House, you can do so at the boxes placed in the lobby, where our storytellers will be arriving shortly to visit with you. There's also an opportunity to have dinner with one of our tonight veteran storytellers as a guest of Knights, the West End Grill, the DAC, Pisano's, or the Common Grill, each an outstanding local restaurant that is supporting this event. You can win this free dinner by participating in the silent auction, which is still ongoing in the lobby. And those of you who would like to donate online should visit vetsinthetheater.org. It is in your program. So once again, it's been a beautiful evening, a wonderful, memorable evening. We thank you for coming tonight. We hope to do this again next year with your support. I'm Steve Schramm from Michigan Radio. Thanks to our generous sponsors, the moving tributes from those who have served us, and thank you all for coming. Be safe, have a wonderful night, and help us build it for the brave. Good night.